Hey there, Logic language learners. Hope you're doing really well. Bit of a different video today, but one that I think is really important for those of you who are reading a lot now. So I deal with a lot of people who come to me because they can't speak, but they've done a heck of a lot of reading. So that's one of my students saying hello. We'll just ignore that beep. So they've done a heck of a lot of reading, which means that they often pick up books, they will often pick up articles, they will often read quite formal French, and they have amazing vocabularies, but they don't actually form French particularly quickly and brilliantly, which is obviously what this method is all about. So, let me just tell someone I'm working, 1 second. Where's she gone? Right, so I could have just refilmed that segment, but I thought I'd be honest. So the fact is, what we're looking at today is the tense that gets used when you have the when you pick up a book. So up until now, I have completely gone out of my way to stress to you that if we are going into the past, we think of I have spoken and I spoke, we think of it as the same thing. We think of it as boom, yeah? And we think of it as an action, and what's this problem I have with F at the moment? I've either stressed two methods. I've either stressed one or two methods. I've either stressed, think about putting an auxiliary in the middle, so have or be, you know, j'ai mangé, il a mangé, or I've talked about je suis allé or je suis parti, so think about putting an auxiliary in, or I've used this symbol to remind you that the past consists of three parts. So the person doing it, the auxiliary, the have or the be, and then the past participle. And one of the hardest things to do when really speaking French properly as an English first language speaker is to drop this impulse to just give me one word for the past. Because you've got I spoke, I went, I died, I ate, I whatever, maybe not I died. You've got all of these kind of words that you use regularly. So that's the issue. We've also then been talking about pasts where we've got one word in the past, which has been the imperfect, which we're not confusing here as an action that we're just talking about in one go. So when we talk about the was, were, used to, ongoing duration actions, you know, I used to live, j'habitais, il mangeait, je touchais, whatever, they are the imperfect, okay? So what we're basically looking at today is the verb tense you will see and possibly have seen if any of you pick up a book. Now, when you learn the passé simple in French, it's normally a pretty advanced thing to learn. And it always amazes my students when they go, oh my gosh, so like, but if a kid was reading a fairy story book or Harry Potter or something, you know, that children read, it's written in le passé simple, okay? And this is the point. So from the get-go, from the beginning in France, we learn this is a tense that we use for literature. Now, let's talk about the passé simple. Here are the rules of the passé simple. Okay, so this is the bit you need to really pay attention to. Rule number 1. You can completely survive and live and function in French for years in a very articulate manner and not use this tense conversationally, okay? It is used conversationally in incredibly formal French or sarcastically to try and come across, you know, if you were pretending to be somewhat formal, you know, in a jokey manner, okay? Which is where I mainly hear it nowadays. Number 2, if you are reading the tense, the main point is for you to be able to recognise it. Okay, so reading is great. We want it to obviously be able to give you an increased vocabulary, and you're going to be coming across a lot of new verbs written in the passé simple that I'd like you to think, oh, well, I know what that verb would be were it not in the passé simple, because I know the format of the passé simple. But ultimately, I'm teaching you the passé simple to be able to recognise it, not to say it. Next thing. The was tense still exists in literature, okay? It is again this action as opposed to this action of the past. So pretty much unless unless you are quoting in a book, like, oh, and then Aladdin said, I have looked for whatever, the princess, then you would have Aladdin said in the passé simple. I have looked for would be j'ai cherché. It would still be in the normal tense. So basically, it's if you're quoting someone speaking, they're not going to use the passé simple. They're going to use the passé composé. They're going to use the normal past. Okay. Next rule. What is the tense called? What am I saying? I'm calling it le passé simple, the simple past, which means that it's in one word. That's the point. It's one word. Okay, that's all it means, the simple past. We also have another tense called le futur simple, which is basically the simple future. Now, for you guys, the simple future means, oh, the easy way, I'm going to dance. Je vais danser. But grammatically, simple future means you're doing it in one word. Je danserai, tu danseras, il dansera, etc. Okay? And while we're there, just remember the first three endings that you just heard there. Danserai, dansera, dansera, because they're going to come up again in a minute. Okay? So, next rule would be that the passé simple is not something you need to be able to produce, nor do I want you particularly saying it. Because as you know, I'm a big believer in working on stuff in your mouth and hearing the voices of what you should be saying. And I am really trying hard here to get you to just feel this gut to use an auxiliary verb in the past. I went, even if it was 60 years ago, I went to see my father as a child, whatever. Okay? I want you to feel this je suis allé. I need you to have that and I don't want you to lose it. Okay, so avoid saying these. I am the king of saying, please can you speak out loud? Please can you do your French homework out loud? Please can you get this in the muscle memory? But for once, I have absolutely no problem if you only look at these endings, okay? Really, genuinely. I don't want these in your mouth, okay? Good, almost ready to go to explain it then. So quick overview, it is a tense that appears in literature and very formal writing. Even kids' literature. It is not something you need for everyday spoken French. It is something you need to be able to recognise. No example that I know of has ever asked anybody to produce any material in the passé simple unless you are writing about language and you maybe wanted to quote something in it. Any exam board where you are writing about literature per se, you would quote your quote that was in the passé simple. Okay, so you'd say, for example, when the principal character says this, said this, then you in theory you could submit an entire essay in the passé simple, but it would be fine to say when the character said da 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 da. You would need to only refer to the quote that you are quoting in the passé simple. Okay, and if I'm not mistaken, most exam boards now, if you're submitting work about that, you're either writing about the work separately, or you're allowed some quotation material with you, or to be brutally honest with you, you won't be expected to memorise huge long quotes of that anyway. Okay, none that I use. Okay, so now let's look at it. So, here we go. So, no auxiliary. So first things first, what do we do when we go into and as per normal, all of the information will be written underneath if I think it's useful in the description box. So have a look in the description box, okay? If you can't find the description box, find the small triangle under the screen, you will find it, okay? Because sometimes on a mobile or a tablet, it's a bit hidden. So let's work through our normal verbs. And for you, to be nice, I'm going to use phrases like ER, RE, IR that I never ever say, do I? So for you, I'm using that because for once we don't care because it's a written concept. So let's look at what we call in French our premier groupe, our first group, our A verbs, our ER verbs, okay? So if we quickly say the verb to have, j'ai, tu as, il a, okay? Think of that as the have. Now we use those on the ends of verbs in the future, don't we? We've talked about how the future and the past match up. So, j'ai mangé, je mangerai. Tu as dansé, tu danseras. Il a dansé, il dansera. Now, what you are doing to form le passé simple with A verbs is you are going to take those endings, A, so AI, AS and A, and you are going to stick them where normal endings would go in the present tense, which means you're going to drop off the ER, or if you're going in imperfect, drop off the ER and add A, so whatever you're doing. So your mouth will be familiar. So for example, danser, to dance, would be danser, dansa, dansa. Okay? D-A-N-S-A-I, D-A-N-S-A-S, D-A-N-S-A. We've added the have part. Yeah? Danser, dansa, dansa. Okay? Let's do a couple more. To speak, parler, so parler, parla, parla. Don't say them. Yeah, don't you get them in your mouth, because that will then mess you guys up when you need to say parler, parler, parler for the was, or je parlerai, tu parleras, il parlera. Please don't say them, just visualize them. Parler, A-I. Parla, A-S. Parla. I spoke, you spoke, he spoke. Okay? Let's do one more with an ER verb. Let's say trouver, to find. So I found in the passé simple, je trouvais. AI, T-R-O-U-V-A-I. Tu trouvas, il trouva. So all good so far. Okay, so when you're reading that and you just recognise the endings that you're used to seeing in the future, or even in the auxiliary I have, that would give it you. You also know who's talking anyway, because you still have the person, don't you? Yeah, we're not dealing like in Spanish, for example, where we don't see the subject. So you'd read, il trouva, he found. You'd know it's il, because you can see il. You'd recognise trouve, you'd recognise the stem, yeah? And the a is obviously, you'd recognise it's a he form, the verb. Okay, good. Now comes the fun bit. Letter M, letter T, letter R, okay? Now, let's deal with the middle two first. If you've had trouver, trouva, trouva, keep the sound going. Not that you're using sound yourself to say it. Am is going to be A with the accent, M-E-S. Am. At with a T. Okay, so let's just deal with a couple of those. Let's talk about that. M-E-S, ooh, that's weird for a nous, isn't it? We haven't got an on there, but we've seen an M-E-S before in French, haven't we? Nous sommes. Okay, so trouvâmes, parlâmes, dansâmes. Then we're going to go, ooh, we haven't seen many with a T instead of an EZ, have we? An EZ for my American followers. But we've seen a couple, vous faites, vous dites. So, for example, you plural, you speak, vous parlâtes. Yeah? Vous trouvâtes. Whatever's going on. Which sounds a bit Latin. If you actually look at Latin conjugations, you sort of see this dum, MT business going on. So let's go from the top up till there. Don't say them out loud, just visualise them. Je trouve, so T-R-O-U-V. Trouver, A-I. Trouva, A-S. Trouva, everything like have. Trouvâmes, trouvat. Lovely. And then the last one, trouver. Now, let's talk about trouver. Okay? No A is going on. Okay? We wouldn't say trouvar. That would be incredibly weird. That would be odd to produce. And because you've got this air business going on, like most of the time in your French, when you've got a long air, you're going to have the grave accent. You're going to have top, left to bottom, right. Okay? So, am, at, air. Okay? And that is going to be your main verb. That's going to be how they're going to be for most of them, for most of your A verbs. Okay? So, that one's pretty sensible. You would recognise them. You would still have the ENT, wouldn't you? You'd have E, long E, R, ENT. So you'd still recognise it was a they, etc. Okay? Lovely. Now let's talk about the next category. The next category that we deal with is, let's go with RE verbs. Okay, no, actually let's just, for my purposes, let's go with IR verbs just for now. Okay? You never ever hear me saying that, do you? You never hear me calling these things that schooly method. Now, repeat after me. The passé simple loves I. The passé simple loves I as a sound. It absolutely loves it. It really loves it. Okay? So if there's a point in your verb where either in the present tense, normally, or the past, you hear an I, then it will grab hold of that I and it will use it to make it in the passé simple. So for example, finir, fini, fini, fini. Fine, we'll go with that. The passé simple will use that. So I finished, je finis. F-I-N-I-S. Tu finis, F-I-N-I-S. He finished.